Hello, welcome to Resilience, Strength Under Stress. My name is Faith Saunders, or you may hear Faith McCalla, same person. Before I begin, to be a part of this New Jersey Hope and Healing initiative that's geared at providing supports to New Jerseyans in this very difficult time. Well, when the pandemic struck earlier this year, the state decided to revive New Jersey Hope and Healing, which is a crisis counseling program to help New Jerseyans as they are trying to make sense out of the pandemic. So the program is funded through the Division of Human Services, Division of Mental Health and Addiction Services through a FEMA grant. There are a number of different components to this initiative. In fact, there are three. There's the one that I am a part of, which is the training, the webinar support, that does a number of different trainings similar to the ones that I am doing. Also providing support groups for individuals. So we have a wide number of support groups that are going on an ongoing basis throughout this time. We also have the individual support, and what we found was that individuals may need someone to actually talk to on a one-on-one basis, and this component of the initiative has trained professionals who are able to provide supports to individuals as they're going through this trying time, not only just in terms of having someone to speak with, but also having access to a huge database that has great resources that someone may benefit from who may need some support but do not know where to go. The other wonderful thing about this component of the New Jersey Hope and Healing is that it's open 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And they also do have bilingual staff on board, which allows them to be able to reach out to a wide gamut of individuals and provide supports in that area. The third component is the tech support line, which is a new component to this whole initiative. It was launched a few months ago because we realized that individuals may be hesitant to do a call, or some people may not be comfortable talking on a webinar, but there are some people, especially younger folks, who are more comfortable doing text. And so the text line was created to provide support to individuals via text. And in fact, it's manned by professionals who respond to individuals through text. It's very easy to do. It's easy by just texting 51684. That's what you'd put where you'd actually put someone's number. And in the area that you would write your message, you would put NJ Hope and then send that off. When you do, you will receive a message that has this link, and you just click on the link and be able to register. The good thing is that you don't need to register only if you need text support, but you can also register, as I did, to receive just some friendly reminder each morning about things that I can do to maintain my overall wellness. So there are times when there's something that's reminding me to drink water. There's times that I've received notices in the morning to exercise. In fact, a few weeks ago, I had one that had a link to an exercise that I could use to do stretches, which was very helpful. So even if you're not going to use this app for texting, it's a great app to have to remind you to take care of your overall wellness. So let's get into the actual training. Resilience, strength under stress. So my hope is that by the end of this training, you'll learn a few things, one of which is how stress manifests itself in your life. Right? Because for each person, it differs. And so often we wait until we are at that stage of stress and not being able to identify when we're becoming stressed causes a lot of unnecessary, at times, stress or being overwhelmed. So the key is, if we can identify what are some of the warning signs that our body gives to us when we are becoming stressed, then we are in a better space to be able to take care of ourselves. I also would like to talk about resilience and what resilience is and factors that make one resilient. We're also going to talk about what are some of the barriers that prevent someone from being resilient. And last but not least, what are some of the ways that we can build our resiliency muscle? I like talking about that. So let's talk a little bit about why we're here. COVID-19. COVID-19 has significantly impacted our lives in so many ways, and not only adults, but it has impacted everyone's life or everything's life. If I could say that. I'm going to just share a quick experience I had. A few weeks ago, I had gotten a message from my library that I had a book that was outstanding from February. Long time, right? I didn't even remember that I had borrowed the book. But anyway, I returned the book, and then I went to get a book, an ebook online to listen to. Not ebook to listen to, and audiobook, I should say, audiobook to listen to, and it would not allow me to. And so when I went to the library, I said, I cannot download the book that I'd like to listen to. And they said, it's because you have a book outstanding. So I said, I did return the book the day before. And they said, well, you may have returned it, but your book is in quarantine until Monday. So, so even the books are being quarantined. So bottom line is, COVID has impacted our lives in every shape and form, and everyone's life, not only here in the United States, but all over the world. So let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that COVID has impacted our lives. Well, if you're like me, I love giving hugs, if he will allow me to. And that's one thing that we are not able to do during this very challenging time, is to be able to socialize and socialize in the way that we usually are and are comfortable doing, being around our friends, family, and being able to be social, be able to give someone a hug if they need a hug. We can't do stuff like that anymore. Another area in which it has impacted our lives is in terms of our eating habits in two shapes and two ways. One, in terms of the food. Initially, when this pandemic started, it was so difficult to get certain food. You went to the supermarket and the shelves were empty. But although we're back at a space where we have food in the supermarket, going to the supermarket is never going to be the same, because you can't just walk into the supermarket. Again, it depends on where you're living. But here in New Jersey, you have to be wearing a mask. You cannot be in that space without wearing a mask. So it's it's just not, I'm going to run into the supermarket and pick up something. It's, you have to be able to prepare to go to the supermarket. And not talking about when you come home from the supermarket. Initially, you would come home and pack away groceries. Today, and in this time, we have to be just very careful that we are not bringing that virus into our homes. So we have to do our due diligence to make sure that the food is clean and that we're not contaminating what we are our living spaces. So that has significantly impacted or has changed as it pertains to due to COVID. Social distancing, we had kind of alluded to it earlier, but not being in a space where we can be next to someone. We have to be 6 feet apart. So that's kind of difficult for many people for many reasons. Then we had the freedom to just do whatever we want to do. We could buy a plane ticket to go wherever we want to go. We could jump in our cars and go wherever we wanted to go. There's so many things that we took for granted that we're not able to do at this point due to this pandemic. Mask. Can't leave home without it. So as I mentioned when I was talking about the supermarket, we can't go to the supermarket without having a mask, but basically we can't go anywhere without a mask. So our life has changed with wearing a mask. And I think at least for myself, I'm still struggling with that, because there are times I'm wearing the mask and I can hardly breathe. I have to lower it a little bit to get some air and then put it back on. So that's still a challenge for some of us. Socializing, as I mentioned, we're opening up a little bit more, where people are socializing, by restaurants are opening and having dining outside. But even then, the tables are 6 feet apart, so that people are not very close together. Students, kids are now being taught virtually, and that's very difficult for some. And teachers, some teachers have had challenges doing that online also, because it's something totally foreign to them, being able to engage a whole group of students in virtually. So that is another area that our lives has been impacted. Of course, some people have lost their jobs, and the benefits that goes along with that due to the pandemic. And of course, I describe this whole thing as we're fighting an invisible silent monster, one that we can't see, and that one that can have a significant impact on our lives. And that's what's causing a significant amount of stress for so many people, because it doesn't seem that there's an end in sight, or in terms of how we're going to be able to deal with this pandemic. And last but not least, we have to wash our hands, constantly wash our hands, so that we don't get ill or get other individuals ill. So these are just a few of the ways that COVID-19 has impacted our lives. I'm sure you can relate to one or more of these. So when we are stressed, let's talk about stress. It manifests itself in different ways in different people's lives. Well, you have some people who are like this person who just say, stay away. I am so stressed, just stay away if you don't want to get hurt, right? Then we have people who just like everything just falls apart because they just don't know what to do. And then you have people who they just clam up. They just fall asleep. They just kind of shut down. And that's me. When I'm really stressed, I just want to go to sleep and just leave me alone, and I'll be okay. Just give me my space. So let's talk about stress a little bit more, what it is, because sometimes we take things for granted that we're all talking about the same thing, and often we're talking about apples and orange. So when I'm talking about stress, I'm defining it as a physical, mental, or emotional factor that causes bodily or mental tension in our bodies. Stress can be external or it can be internal. External, example, the pandemic, COVID-19. Or it can be internal, being ill, or from going through a procedure. All of these factors are considered internal stressors. So let's talk a little bit more about what do you know about stress. When I was doing a live webinar, then I would be asking people questions. So I'll just be walking through this with you. So how much do we know about stress? Well, the first thing is that not that all stress is bad. It's not. Not all stress is bad. Stress can be a good thing because it motivates us to keep on going and do things. It keeps us alert. It keeps us and help us from avoiding danger. So it can be a good thing in our lives, right? However, we have negative stress. And this is when we are faced with a prolonged challenge, our body is in hyper alert, and there is no release. There's no release of the tension in our bodies. And that can have really long-term negative impact on our overall well-being. The next thing that I have here is that our body's response to stress is known as the fight or flight response. And that's true. When we are stressed or when we are getting stressed, our body creates certain hormones that deals with and prepares us to deal with the anticipated stressor that we're facing. Sometimes we respond to this by fighting to get out of the situation, or fighting. That's mean leaving the situation, avoiding the situation so that we can protect ourselves. Some people freeze, and that's a response that sometimes is overlooked, that individuals sometimes freeze. They just can't do anything. They can't move, they can't do anything. And these form of responses are aimed to help to protect us. But sometimes we are in a space where it's a prolonged, in that space where we don't have the option of fighting or flighting, or flying away, for want of a better word. But and sometimes we freeze, and if we're stuck in a space for a prolonged period of time with that tension, it causes a lot of damage, or it can cause a lot of damage. Stress without any release leads to a condition called distress, and that is true. Distress can disturb the body's equilibrium, and it can lead to physical symptoms such as headaches, upset stomach. Some people may have difficulty sleeping. Some people may be experiencing physical pain that cannot be, there's no real source of it, in terms of when they go to the doctor. There's no real source of that pain, and sometimes that's due to the stress that we're under. Some people may have elevated blood pressure. So there are a number of different ways that stress manifests itself in our lives, and it's very important for us as individuals to be mindful of what that and how they do present itself. Also, stress can lead to depression and anxiety and other mental health challenges. The next one is the use of substances. I'll use my camera away here. Use of substances to relieve stress tends to keep the body in a stress state and cause more problems. That's definitely true. Stress is harmful when people engage in compulsive use of substances or partake in behaviors that they use to try to relieve the stress that they're under. Some of the things that we sometimes use as a way of relieving the stress that's not necessarily good for us, it's food. Sometimes we do comfort eating. We're eating all the fast food and all that food that tastes really good, but really it's not good for our bodies. And as with anything in moderation is okay. But if we're doing this for a prolonged period of time, it can have long-term implications on our lives. Alcohol. So often I've heard so many people say, well, I can't wait to go home to have a glass of wine. That's okay. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if our only way of coping is to continuously consume alcohol and other drugs or other forms of drugs. And when I say drugs, it doesn't have to necessarily mean illegal drugs. It could be medications. Other forms of substances that people use is gambling, sex, shopping. You know, some of the things I've heard during these webinars about people just needing to go out shop because they're feeling so stressed. And shopping is good in one respect, but if we're spending money that we don't have, that's even making the situation even worse. So what are some of the warning signs that you are getting stressed? Here are some of the warning signs. And I just want to keep this up for just a second for you to kind of look at it and look at it and see if you can identify with any of these. As I mentioned in the training objective, one of my major objectives is for you to walk away from this training knowing what are some of the signs that your body gives to you that you are becoming stressed. Not when you are stressed, but that you are becoming stressed. So I hope you can identify with something so that next time that you are becoming stressed, you are more aware of it and that you can do something about it before it gets worse. Sorry. So, one of the things I also know is that as people, we are resilient. We are resilient. But the sad thing is that when we are going through very difficult time, as many of us are during this pandemic, we forget how resilient we are and times in our lives when we were resilient. And that's the next thing that I'd like for you to walk away with from this training is to be able to remember the times that you were resilient and what were some of the things that helped you during those difficult times to be resilient, because those are things that you can pull on during this time to possibly help you through what you're going through. So let's talk about what is resilience. Resilience is a quality that helps someone to bounce back from tough times, may it be trauma, a tragedy, a threat, or the loss of a significant person in our lives. But that's the formal definition. The definition that I really love is this quote, and it says, "The oak fought the wind and was broken. The willow bent when it must and survived." And for me, that is it's a really good visual of what resilience is. So take a look at this picture. What or how does it relate to the word or the term resiliency? Well, since I don't have anyone to ask, I'll give you the answer. Well, as you can see with the background, this plant is in soil that is so obvious that there is a drought here, that the ground is cracked from the lack of moisture. But for some reason, there was a seed that persevered and was able to wind its way through and to be able to come through to the surface. And not only is this plant surviving, it's thriving, because you can see there are different buds that are coming up that hasn't bloomed totally as yet. So there is something within this plant that gave it what it needed in order to persevere through all that it may have had to go through in order to be able to come to the surface. And similar to this plant, we all have this within us, the ability to thrive, not only survive, but thrive during difficult times. So I want to share with you some examples of people who are resilient. And I'm going to be sharing a video with you at this time that really demonstrates someone who is resilient or who has been resilient in her life. Go back. Video is not playing for some reason. However, this is a video of, or was going to be a video of Bonnie St. John. And Bonnie is someone who has a disability. At a very early age, her leg from the hip down was amputated, and she was asked, I think it was age 7, she was asked, she was told the situation with her leg and that there is this option of amputating it because her leg was longer than the other, and she made a decision at that early age to have her leg amputated. But the video shows that she did not make that decision, or what has happened to her life limit her ability to not only survive but also thrive. She's an economist. She has served in government in so many different capacities, and she's an Olympic ski she has, I think, 3 or 4 medals, gold medals from skiing. So her story was very powerful, and it's one that I admire, and that one that's really empowering to me when I see it or watch it, no matter how many times, because she didn't make what has happened to her hold her back. I'm sorry I couldn't play it. I don't know why it's not playing, but it's not at this time. So other people who are resilient, there it is. You are resilient. You are resilient. And I want you to just take a second and think about a time in your life that you were resilient. So why is resiliency important? It's important for a number of different reasons. One, it helps it helps us to develop protection against experiences which could be overwhelming. So because we have that knowledge that we're resilient, and we're tapping into those bag of tricks, that I call them, that we use to survive, we're not feeling overwhelmed as we would if we didn't have those tools or those coping skills that we are using. So having resiliency helps us to develop protection. It also helps us to maintain balance in our lives during difficult times, because we know that this too shall pass. It protects us from developing some mental health challenges, for example, depression, anxiety, and even the use of substances. And last but not least, it reduces the use of risk-taking behavior. So for example, the excessive use of drugs, alcohol, and other destructive behaviors. So what are some of the barriers to resilience? These are things that hinders or constrain the implementation of our resiliency muscle, or resiliency tools, for want of a better word. Low self-esteem and confidence. People who have very low self-esteem and confidence find it very difficult to be resilient during difficult times. Fear is another factor that sometimes impacts our resiliency. Culture, not only in the terms of the macro level, on a macro level, but also on a micro level, as it pertains to how we were raised. Sometimes how our backgrounds actually impact how we actually see and perceive things. And if we were raised in a situation where we had family members or caregivers that helped us to see that although this is a difficult situation, you still do have options, then you may look at what we're going through different lens than someone who may not have had that exposure. Support system. The studies show that that's one of the number one factors that's needed in order for someone to be resilient. It's the support network. And there are studies that say that if we have at least one positive role model or positive support in our lives, then we are more likely to be resilient than people who don't have any support at all. Emotional wellness or emotional intelligence. The less emotional intelligence someone has, that's a barrier to their resilience, because they're not able to regulate their emotions when they're going through very difficult times. And perfectionism, that word, I sometimes have difficulty saying it, but perfectionism is also a barrier to resilience, because the truth is we don't have control over many things. There are some things that we have control over, but majority of what's happening to us, especially during this time, is most of which we don't have control. They're external to us and we don't have control over them. And so if you're a perfectionist and you're trying to control everything, then you're more causing more harm to yourself than good, because you're trying to control things that are out of your control. So some resiliency factors. Research shows that these key factors, if we have them or we practice them in our lives, they help us to be resilient. So if we're hopeful, if we have a positive attitude, if we're able to regulate our emotions and manage strong feelings and impulses, if we're able to see failure as a form of helpful feedback, then these factors help us to be more resilient. And I'd like to just take a minute to speak about seeing failure as a form of helpful feedback. No matter what's happening to us, we're gathering what I call data. Things may not have worked out the way that we may want, but we have data. We have data that we can actually use for the future to make certain decisions in terms of what works and what does not work, or how to tweak something that it may work. So no matter what we're going through, our perception of the situation is very important as it pertains to our overall resiliency and our ability to deal with the situation. Other resiliency factors: caring and supportive relationships within or outside of our families. And I spoke about that earlier, but that's a key factor for someone to be resilient, having a caring or supportive relationship with or with outside of our families. Having capacity to make realistic plans. So things may be all in chaos at this point, and there are certain things that we can't control. But for the things that we can control, can we make some plans, some realistic plans to start taking some steps? That gives help to empower us and to feel more in control of our life in some capacity. Also, positive view of yourself and confidence in your strength and abilities. That's also very important as it pertains to be able to be resilient. Having the skill to communicate and problem solve is also a resiliency factor. So, resiliency strategies. What are some of the things that we can actually do? Before I actually even go into that, I want to really emphasize that resiliency is a personal journey. The tools and the strategies that one person used to help them to be resilient is unique to that person. It's unique for each individual. So it's very important for us to realize that this is a personal journey, and no two people may have the same ways of coping. People use varying strategies to deal with traumatic and stressful events. So what may work for me may not work for you. But the bottom line is to have exposure to a number of different things. Like I call them different menus to choose from, and that we can actually pull from when we're in certain situations. Cultural differences play a significant impact in terms of how we cope, and I spoke about that earlier. Ways to build resiliency. So make connections. That's very, very important. Having those relationships, not only in our family, but also outside of our family. And, sometimes people have family, but sometimes that's not the most supportive environment to be in based on what's happening within your family. And, if that's your situation, all is not lost. You can still create support and provide connection outside of your family. Accepting help and support. This is usually sometimes the thing that is our downfall. Many of us see accepting help and asking for help as a sign of weakness, when in fact it's a sign of strength. Knowing what you want and being able to ask for it is powerful. right? It can help us to really persevere and actually get through some very tough times. Being active in civic groups. So taking ourselves outside, taking ourselves outside of what's happening to us and actually see how we can actually be of support to someone else is another way of building our resiliency. Because sometimes just stepping outside of ourselves help us to actually see that we have a lot to be grateful for. And with it, that frame of mind can actually help us to see things totally different. We can also assist others in their time of need. Although we're in this time where we can't be social in terms of being in people's space, we can do something. If we have a neighbor who is elderly, maybe going out to the supermarket and getting he or she groceries is a way of actually helping. Other ways: set realistic goals and work towards achieving them. Avoid seeing crises as insurmountable problems. They said one way of eating an elephant is one bite at a time. So although you may have a lot happening, it's very important to realize that you can't deal with everything all at once. We have to put things in we have to put things in priority. I hope I pronounced that right. I always have problems with that. That's okay. But we putting things in order in terms of importance, another way of actually saying it, does help us to kind of streamline and reduce our stress level. Also, practicing mindfulness and gratitude, being grateful, does make a big difference in building our resilience. Being mindful, being in the moment when we're doing things, to pay attention, not only to what we're doing, but how we're feeling. And last, I have here, moving it, taking care of ourselves. And if I was doing a live webinar, I would have a discussion with you in terms of what are you doing to take care of yourself? What have you been doing? Well, since I don't have someone to speak with, I'll share about what I have been doing to take care of myself. I've been exercising. I must admit that it's not something that I cherish doing, but I also know that is something that's necessary for me to do. And so walking, I've been doing walks with my son, and I've also have walking buddies. So different days of the week, I have different walking buddies, people who I walk with, because I find when I do walk with someone, the time goes very fast. So walking is a way that I have been taking care of myself. Also trying to eat better, not eating a lot of sweets and all those things. And to be honest, that is difficult, especially when you're at home and you're confronted with so many things that you could actually eat. So, but it's very important for us to take care of ourselves. So I really challenge you to think about what have you been doing to take care of yourself, and also how can you improve on taking care of yourself. Other ways to build resiliency: look for opportunities for self-discovery. Learn something about yourself. Through this pandemic, we were inside for almost 3-4 months. What is something that you learned about yourself during that time? It wasn't all doom and gloom. I'm sure there's things that you learned about yourself that you didn't know, but this is a time to reflect on that and to get to know yourself, learn more about who you are as a person. Nurture a positive view of yourself. Develop confidence in your abilities to solve problems. You have gone through 3 or 4 months, we're 7 months of this pandemic, and you're still here. So you must be doing something right. So start nurturing the things that you have done right to be able to take care of yourself and your family. Trust your instincts and use that to help you to build your resiliency. And as I mentioned earlier, take care of yourself. So I'd like to end by kind of summarizing what this is all about. The time that we are going through is causing stress on so many levels for all of us, young, old, and mature. Oh, let me take that back. Young as well as mature. And it's very important for us to recognize this, but equally of importance, it's very important for us to recognize when we are becoming stressed. I also know that we are all resilient people, and we have demonstrated that time and time again in our life. And it's very important for us to be mindful of that and to take that into consideration, especially during this time when we are in a space of significant stress. And one of the things I also like to share is that people who are resilient have a greater sense of control over their lives. Studies have shown that over and over. And that ways to build resiliency include being flexible, remember, bending, open to learning, and being able to release tension. So that's the closing portion of what this webinar is all about. I really hope that you learned something that could actually enhance or improve your life. I'd like you to mention some webinars, or not webinars, or support groups that are ongoing through this whole process through New Jersey Hope and Healing. Here we have on my left one that I'm starting next week, which is September 30th, and it's going until November 4th at 7 p.m. Each Wednesday, and it's for single parents to come together and speak about just some of the things that have been happening in their lives and get in support around that. So that's one that I'm starting, as I mentioned, on September 30th, and it's going on through November 4th. And I really want to mention that there is nothing mandatory that you have to be at all of the training. Drop in when you can, and just be able to provide, to receive some support, but also of importance is giving support to someone else. Parents of college students. Many college students are home because they're doing classes virtually. And so many parents who were empty nesters now have their homes. They have kids back home. And so for some, that's stressful. So this particular group is for parents to just have a place where they can speak and share what is happening and get some support on that level. Also, we have many people working from home, and you're working from home and your kids are at home, and it's not easy. So this is a space for you to have your time to kind of just get some support and just be. The other group that we're having is one for individuals who are survivors of COVID-19. And it's a space where people can talk about the impact the virus has had on their lives, even though that they are in recovery. Some other groups, we have a Spanish group, which is a great group. I think that's one of the most vibrant groups that we do have. And that one happens 3 times a week. And the information is here. The person who facilitated is awesome. And it's a group, as I said, it's one of the most vibrant of all the support groups that we're doing. We have one for individuals who are LGBTQ. This is a place also that individuals can actually share how has this pandemic impacted your life, and get some support in that area. And last but not least, we have one for healthcare workers. I'd like to end this webinar by sharing a quote by Maya Angelou. And she says, "I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it." And that's my hope, is that we're going through a very difficult time, and it's changing. It has to change our lives in some shape or form. But I hope that you refuse to be reduced by it. We're all resilient, and let's use those resilient muscles. So thank you so much for watching this webinar. Thank you.